The Persian rug, a gift from Helen's parents for our 20th anniversary, felt like a battlefield. The scent of spilled coffee, dark and bitter, was already sinking into the fibers. My daughter Chloe stood trembling, not with remorse, but with rage. Her husband Derek lounged on the leather sofa I had worked 3 summers of overtime to afford, a smirk playing on his lips. The inheritance documents in my hand felt flimsy, like a paper shield against a battering ram. 30 years of careful planning, of quiet sacrifices, were being treated like a winning lottery ticket they were impatient to cash. Dad, do you even understand that I need the money now, not after you die? Chloe's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. The shattered remains of her coffee cup lay on the floor between us, a testament to her lack of control. I gripped the papers tighter, the crisp edges digging into my palm. My knuckles were white. Chloe, I am your father, not an automated teller machine. You will receive your inheritance when the time comes, as your mother and I planned. Derek shifted, sinking deeper into the sofa's worn leather. Come on, Art. She's your only daughter. What's a few thousand to help us out? A few thousand. The casualness of it was a slap in the face. Last month, it was 5,000 for Derek's gambling debts. The month before, it was 2,000 for what Chloe called an unavoidable shopping spree. Their emergencies were a constant, roaring fire, and my retirement fund was the forest they expected me to clear-cut to keep it burning. Help you out? I stood up, my 66-year-old knees protesting the sudden movement. I've been helping you out for 3 straight years. My savings are not your personal bank. Helen appeared in the doorway connecting the living room to the kitchen, a dish towel twisted in her hands. Please, everyone, just calm down. We can talk about this reasonably. Reasonably? Chloe whirled to face her mother, her voice dripping with scorn. He's sitting on hundreds of thousands while we're drowning in debt. Debt you created, I said, my own voice dangerously quiet. Debt from your choices. I glanced at the fireplace mantel, at the silver-framed family photo that was now lying face down. Had it fallen during her tantrum, or had she turned it over herself? A small, symbolic act of erasure. Derek leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression a mask of false sincerity. Look, old man, you're not getting any younger. Why not enjoy sharing your wealth while you're alive to see it appreciated? Old man. The disrespect was a physical thing, something I could taste. This from a man who hadn't held a steady job in years, who financed his life with my daughter's credit cards, cards that I ultimately paid off. Because I worked 43 years for that money, I said, each word landing like a hammer blow. 43 years of 12-hour shifts at the construction site, of missed dinners, of canceled vacations. All so you could have a comfortable childhood, Chloe. So, your mother and I could retire with dignity. Dignity? She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that didn't belong in this house. What's dignified about hoarding money while your daughter suffers? I looked at her designer handbag, her freshly highlighted hair, Derek's brand new sneakers. Their suffering looked remarkably comfortable. Your suffering is self-inflicted. The words were out before I could stop them. Every crisis, every emergency, every desperate plea. You created them all. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Helen stood frozen, knowing I had just crossed a line we could never uncross. Peter stood up, his smirk gone, replaced by something dark and menacing. You know what I think, Art? I think you enjoy watching us struggle. It makes you feel powerful, doesn't it? Get out. The command came from a place deep inside me. I hadn't visited in years. Both of you, get out of my house. Your house? Chloe's eyes glittered. This house that Mom helped pay for? This house where I grew up? You can't just kick me out. Watch me, I said. I walked to the front door of the craftsman home I had spent a decade renovating with my own hands and pulled it open. The cool Denver evening air rushed in, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's yard. Take your husband and leave. Don't come back until you're ready to discuss your solutions to your problems. Solutions that do not involve my wallet. You'll regret this, she hissed, grabbing her purse. When you're old and sick and need someone, remember this moment. Remember how you chose money over family. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floor. Derek followed, pausing at the threshold to give me one last glare. This isn't over, old man. The door slammed shut, rattling the stained glass panels. The silence they left behind was heavier than their shouting had ever been. I turned from the closed door. The living room, our sanctuary for 38 years, looked like a crime scene. Helen was already picking up the scattered inheritance documents, her movements precise and deliberate, as if trying to restore order to a world that had just been torn apart. The dark stain of coffee on the Persian rug seemed to grow larger, a permanent mark of the morning's ugliness. She didn't look at me. "William," she began, her voice barely a whisper. But she didn't finish. What was there to say? We both knew what we had just witnessed. It wasn't just an argument. It was a final unraveling. I walked to the mantel and picked up the family photo, the one I had righted just an hour ago. It was a picture from a trip to the mountains years ago. A 5-year-old Chloe, gap-toothed and beaming, sat perched on my shoulders. When had that joyful, innocent child become this manipulative stranger? My phone buzzed on the end table, a sharp, intrusive sound in the heavy silence. I didn't need to look to know who it was from. The message glowed on the screen, a digital poison dart. "Dad, I hope you're happy. The kids need winter coats and school supplies, but apparently your precious money is more important than your grandchildren, Lily and Noah. Don't expect to see them anytime soon. The final weapon. The one she always saved for last." I showed the screen to Helen. I watched her face crumple, the last bit of composure dissolving into pure maternal grief. "She wouldn't," Helen whispered, her eyes pleading with me to deny it. "She wouldn't really keep them from us." But we both knew she would. She had done it before, for a week here, 2 weeks there, whenever we didn't immediately give in to her demands. The children were just bargaining chips in her endless war for my wallet. "Maybe we should reconsider," Helen said, her voice trembling. "Number." The word was like a stone in my mouth. Hard and final. No more. I will not be held hostage by my own grandchildren. I will not teach Lily and Noah that love can be bought. The next 6 days were the quietest I had experienced in years. The phone didn't ring with a frantic, manufactured crisis. No desperate text messages demanding an immediate transfer of funds appeared on my screen. The silence was both a relief and a torment. It was the calm before a storm, a calculated absence designed to make us anxious, to make us break first. Helen moved through the house like a ghost. She cleaned, she gardened, she baked. She did all the normal things, but the joy was gone from them. I would find her staring out the kitchen window, lost in thought, and I knew she was mourning the daughter she thought she had raised. I spent the time in my workshop, sanding down a piece of old furniture, the repetitive motions soothing my frayed nerves. With every pass of the sandpaper, I felt like I was stripping away decades of enabling, of making excuses, of pretending that Chloe's problems weren't a direct result of her own choices. The relief of the silence was real, but so was the underlying dread. This wasn't over. Chloe wasn't the type to simply give up. She was regrouping, planning her next assault. Father's Day arrived on a clear, bright Colorado morning. I sat on the front porch, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, the Sunday paper unread in my lap. I tried to find a sense of normalcy in the familiar routine, but it felt hollow. Across the street, my neighbor Ben Carter was meticulously tending his rose bushes. He gave me a friendly wave. I waved back, a lump forming in my throat. Normal families. Normal fathers were probably getting handmade cards and burnt toast from their children, not strategic silence and ultimatums. Helen was inside, the soft clatter of breakfast dishes drifting through the open window. We hadn't mentioned Chloe's name since the day of the fight. The subject was a raw wound we were both afraid to touch. I watched the quiet suburban street, the families heading out for their Sunday activities, and a profound sadness settled over me. This Father's Day felt like an ending, not a celebration. I didn't know it yet, but the silence was about to be broken in a way I could never have imagined. The low rumble of a heavy engine broke through the morning quiet. I looked up from the sports section to see a familiar brown UPS truck slowing in front of our house. It was unusual. We weren't expecting anything, and Sunday deliveries were a rarity, reserved for those who paid a premium for the service. The driver, a young man in a crisp uniform, hopped out, consulted his handheld device, and then pulled a medium-sized box from the back of his truck. He walked up the driveway with a professional stride, clearly working holiday overtime. "Arthur Peterson?" he asked. That's me, I said, folding my newspaper. Happy Father's Day, he said with a polite smile, handing me the package and an electronic clipboard. Someone must think highly of you to pay for weekend delivery. I signed my name, my eyes scanning the shipping label as he walked away. There was no return address, just a generic label from a shipping center downtown. As the truck pulled away, Ben Carter looked up from his roses across the street. Getting a special delivery, Art? He called out, his voice cheerful. You never know what surprises the kids have in store on Father's Day. I forced a smile. You certainly don't, Ben. I held the box in my hands. It felt surprisingly light for its size, about the dimensions of a shoebox, but weighing no more than a couple of pounds. Who's that from? Helen asked from the kitchen doorway as I stepped inside, wiping her hands on her apron. I have no idea, I said, placing the package on the coffee table, the same table where the inheritance documents had been scattered just 6 days before. No return address. She walked over, her expression a mixture of curiosity and her usual caution. Helen had always been more wary of the unexpected than I was, a trait I sometimes teased her about but was now beginning to appreciate. She leaned closer, examining the box with the methodical attention she gave to everything. Her fingers traced the edges of the shipping label, then stopped. Arthur, she said, her voice suddenly low and tense. Don't open it. Why not? I asked, looking up from the package. It's probably just a gift from the kids. Look closer, she whispered. She pointed to a spot on the side of the box, something I had completely missed in my casual handling of it. Can't you see them? The holes. My stomach dropped. Now that she'd pointed them out, they were impossible to miss. A series of tiny, precise punctures in the cardboard, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. They weren't accidental damage from shipping. Someone had made them on purpose. They're for breathing, Helen stated, her voice flat with dawning horror as she took a step back from the coffee table, which means something alive is inside. Breathing holes, I repeated, the words feeling foreign and heavy in my mouth. We stood there in our sunlit living room, staring at the innocent-looking cardboard box as if it were a bomb. The suburban quiet outside suddenly felt ominous. Who would send us something alive? Helen whispered. But even as she asked, a cold, sickening certainty began to settle deep in my gut. The timing. The anonymous sender who knew our address. The special Sunday delivery to ensure we would be home. This wasn't a gift. This was a message. And then we heard it. From inside the box came the faintest sound, a soft, dry rustling. We both froze, our eyes locked on the package. The sound stopped as quickly as it had started, leaving us in a silence so thick I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Helen grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Did you hear that? She breathed. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. Whatever was in that box was awake. And then, the sound came again, longer this time, and completely unmistakable. A soft, deliberate hiss that sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. The hiss stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was filled with a terrifying, slithering potential. Helen's grip on my arm was the only thing that felt real. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. William, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Call someone. Now. My hands shook as I pulled my phone from my pocket. My mind, usually so orderly, felt like a chaotic storm of possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. I fumbled with the screen, my thumb slipping twice before I managed to dial the 3 numbers that had always seemed so abstract, so distant from our quiet suburban life. The dispatcher's voice was calm, a woman's voice trained to handle panic. 911. What's your emergency? We have a suspicious package, I stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. It was delivered to our house this morning. There's no return address, and there's something alive inside. It's making noises. Sir, can you describe the sounds you're hearing? The dispatcher asked, her tone even, and professional. I glanced at Helen, who just nodded, her face pale. The hissing had stopped again, but the memory of it was seared into my brain. Hissing, I said, the word tasting like poison, like a snake. Saying it out loud made it real, transforming a vague fear into a concrete, terrifying reality. Okay, sir. I'm dispatching officers to your location immediately. I need you to maintain a safe distance from the package. Do not touch it or attempt to open it. Can you and your wife move to another room? We're in the living room, I replied, my voice cracking. About 10 feet away. Should we leave the house? Stay inside for now, but keep your distance. Officers will be there within 10 minutes. Do not, under any circumstances, touch or move the package. The line went quiet, except for the sound of her typing. 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. The wail of a siren in the distance was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A few minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into our driveway, its lights flashing silently, casting red and blue strobes across our living room walls. The doorbell rang, sharp and authoritative. I opened it to a police officer whose solid presence immediately filled the doorway. His name tag read, Reeves. He was tall, with the calm, alert eyes of someone who had seen it all. Mr. Peterson? I'm Officer Reeves. We received your call about a suspicious package. Yes. Thank you for coming so quickly, I said, stepping aside to let him in. It's in the living room. Helen appeared in the hallway, still twisting the dish towel in her hands. Officer, we're just so grateful you're here. We didn't know what else to do. You did exactly the right thing, ma'am, he said, his voice carrying a calm authority that began to cut through my panic. We led him to the living room. The box seemed to radiate a malevolent energy from its place on our coffee table. Officer Reeves approached it carefully, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. And you heard hissing sounds coming from inside? He asked, examining the shipping label without touching the box itself. Yes, Helen confirmed quietly. Like a... She trailed off, unable to say the word again. Like a snake, Officer Reeves finished for her, his tone matter-of-fact. I've handled a few of these before. Usually a harmless prank, but we take every precaution. I'm calling animal control. They have the proper equipment for safe removal. As he spoke into his radio, he turned back to us, his gaze shifting from procedural to investigative. Do you have any idea who might have sent this to you, Mr. Peterson? The question I had been dreading. I felt Helen's eyes on me. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say it was just some random prank, but the words wouldn't come. I can't imagine. I managed, the lie feeling clumsy and obvious. His gaze sharpened. This required planning, sir. Access to a live animal, shipping materials, paying for a special delivery. This wasn't a random act. Have you had any recent conflicts? Any family disagreements? Family disagreements. The phrase struck me with the force of a physical blow. My mind flashed back to Chloe's face, contorted with rage, to Derek's menacing glare. And then, the final, damning piece of the puzzle crashed into my memory with terrible clarity. The credit card statement from 3 weeks ago. Chloe was an authorized user for emergencies. I had seen the charge and dismissed it, assuming it was a gift for one of the kids. Reptile Palace. $127.50. Mr. Peterson, are you all right? Officer Reeves asked, noticing the color drain from my face. I forced myself back to the present, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'm fine, I lied, my voice hoarse, just processing all of this. But I wasn't fine. I knew. In that single sickening moment of recall, I knew with absolute certainty my daughter had sent me a snake. The arrival of the white animal control van felt like the turning of a final page. The specialist, a calm, bearded man named Mike Johnson, worked with a quiet competence that was immensely reassuring. He laid a thick blanket on the floor, placed the box in the center, and used a long-handled tool to carefully pry open the lid. Helen and I stood back with Officer Reeves, watching with held breath. A flash of orange and red shifted inside the box. Mike expertly reached in with a pair of padded tongs and gently lifted out a 3-foot corn snake. It twisted calmly in his grip, its patterned scales gleaming in the morning light. Well, it's a corn snake, Mike said, his voice casual. Non-venomous. Beautiful specimen, actually. Someone paid good money for this one. He placed it into a secure carrier. They make excellent pets when they're cared for. It's a shame someone would use it for a cruel prank like this. Shipping a live reptile is not only dangerous for the animal, it's illegal. Officer Reeves made a final note in his pad. Will you be filing a formal report, Mr. Peterson? We can try to trace the package's origin, pursue charges if we identify the sender. I looked at Helen, saw the conflict warring in her eyes. Part of her wanted justice, but the larger part, the mother, still wanted to protect her child, no matter how monstrous her actions. I had no such conflict left. But justice, I decided, would be on my own terms. No, officer, I said, my voice steady. Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. As you said, it was probably just a prank. He nodded, though his expression told me he knew there was more to the story. After he and Mike Johnson had driven away, the house was finally quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of a home that had been violated. Helen busied herself in the kitchen, the frantic sound of running water her only response to the stress. I stood by the front window, watching the normal world go on outside, feeling completely detached from it. The credit card charge burned in my memory. Reptile Palace. The proof was there, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know for certain. Are you really going to call her? Helen asked softly from the doorway. I have to, I said. My hands were surprisingly steady as I scrolled to Chloe's contact. Her smiling face looked back at me from the screen. A photo taken at Lily's last birthday party. A lifetime ago. The phone rang twice before she answered. Dad? Her voice was bright, cheerful, and utterly fake. Happy Father's Day. How's your morning going? The audacity of it, the sheer, cold-blooded nerve, almost took my breath away. I kept my own voice level, a feat of immense self-control. It's been an interesting morning, actually. Chloe, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a strange Father's Day gift that arrived, would you? Her denial was immediate, almost too quick. No, Dad, what happened? Is everything okay? And then I heard it. In the background, faint but unmistakable, was Derek's laugh. It wasn't a laugh of surprise. It was a low, satisfied snicker. The sound of a man who thought he had just gotten away with a perfect, clever prank. In that single careless sound, all doubt, all hope, all lingering threads of fatherly denial vanished. It was them. The knowledge settled not with a fiery rage, but with a chilling, absolute clarity. It was just some confusion with the delivery, I said, my voice now strangely calm. Nothing important. I should let you go. Are you sure you're okay? You sound strange. Everything's fine, Chloe. Enjoy your Sunday. I ended the call before she could reply, before the mask of my composure could crack. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling slightly now that it was over. Helen was at my side, her eyes reading my face. You heard something, she stated. He laughed, I said, the words flat and lifeless. When she asked what happened, Derek laughed like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. She said nothing, just placed her hand on my arm. But I didn't need comfort. I needed action. I turned and walked toward my home office, the room where I had spent countless nights planning for a future that now seemed like a fantasy. The room was lined with file cabinets, filled with the paper trail of my life's work and the receipts of my daughter's endless emergencies. Bank statements, canceled checks, loan agreements I knew would never be honored. 30 years of enabling, all neatly documented. I sat down in my old leather desk chair, the computer humming quietly. I didn't need to look at the files. I knew what they contained. What I needed was to ensure that not one more cent of my life's work would go toward funding the cruelty I had been subjected to this morning. I looked at the computer screen, at the portal to our financial world, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. 7 o'clock in the evening found me in the quiet stillness of my home office. The anger from the morning had settled into a cold, hard resolve. My desk was a museum of a father's misplaced generosity. Stacks of bank statements showed the steady one-way flow of funds from my account to hers, credit card bills I'd paid without question, insurance premiums, car payments, and dozens of emergency loans that were never repaid, 3 decades of enabling disguised as love. The computer screen glowed, a portal to the financial world that had bound me to my daughter's irresponsibility. My fingers moved steadily over the keyboard as I logged into our online bank. The passwords were ones Chloe would never guess, small fragments of a life she had never bothered to learn about. First, the credit card account, the same one that held the damning charge from the Reptile Palace. I navigated to the account details page. There was her name, listed as an authorized user, a status I had granted her in college 20 years ago for emergencies. A permanent state of emergency had become her lifestyle. I clicked on Manage Users. The system prompted me with security questions I hadn't seen in years. What was your mother's maiden name? What was the name of the street you grew up on? Simple answers that unlocked a power I should have used long ago. Remove. Authorized user. Chloe Peterson. My cursor hovered over the confirm button for a long moment. It wasn't a moment of hesitation, but of profound finality. With a single, deliberate click, I severed the primary financial artery that had fed her reckless life for 2 decades. A small notification appeared. User access revoked. Changes will take effect within 1 business hour. Next came the security protocols. Chloe had at some point learned the PIN for my debit card, likely by watching over my shoulder during one of her many tearful rescue missions at an ATM. I opened the account settings and found the option to change it. The old number had been a combination of her birth date. Sentimental foolishness on my part. I selected a new one, the year Helen and I were married. A number that meant everything to us, and nothing to Chloe. I did the same for every other account, creating a digital fortress with walls she could not breach. The last step was the most direct. The automated payments. I navigated to the transfer schedule, a list of my monthly obligations, but interspersed with our mortgage and utility bills was the chronicle of my daughter's dependency. First, the $1,000 monthly transfer to her checking account, labeled apartment rent. I clicked the small cancel button beside it. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" I clicked yes. Next, the payment for her car insurance. Canceled. Then, a subscription service for a high-end gym, one she'd convinced me was essential for her mental health. Canceled. Each click was a quiet, methodical act of liberation. I wasn't punishing her. I was finally forcing her to face the consequences of her own life. I remembered her last call for money, just a month ago, the sobbing promises that this would be the absolute last time. I had believed her, transferring another $5,000. I hadn't been helping her. I had been teaching her that consequences were for other people. The final screen showed a summary of my actions. Credit access removed, automatic payments canceled, PIN codes updated, 30 years of enabling undone in 30 minutes. I clicked Save Changes. Leaning back in my leather chair, I felt a sense of control I hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow, Chloe would wake up and discover her financial safety net was gone. For the first time in her adult life, the consequences of her choices would be entirely her own. My desk phone remained silent, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The next morning began with a peace that felt foreign. I sat at our kitchen table, the aroma of Helen's coffee mingling with the sunlight streaming through her herb garden on the windowsill. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a phone call, wasn't dreading a new financial emergency. I was simply enjoying my coffee. Helen moved quietly around the kitchen, her presence a comforting constant. The storm had passed, and a quiet calm had taken its place. The phone rang at precisely 8:15. Chloe's name flashed on the screen. Helen and I exchanged a look. I let it ring twice more, a small act of reclaiming my own time, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Good morning, Chloe." "Dad, what have you done?" Her voice was a shrill assault, stripped of all pretense, a raw nerve of pure panic. "My card isn't working. I tried to buy groceries and it was declined." The automatic payment for my car insurance bounced. What is happening? I took a slow sip of coffee before responding, letting the silence stretch. What's happening, Chloe, is that I know you sent me that Father's Day gift. The line went quiet for 3 full seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from panic to a furious, defensive hiss. "You've lost your mind. What are you talking about? How could you do this to me?" Her reaction told me everything. Not a single note of confusion, not, "What gift?" Just an immediate, wounded accusation that I had somehow wronged her. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly, my voice the anchor in her hurricane. "I simply stopped paying for your choices." "This is insane. You can't just cut me off without any warning. I have bills to pay, Responsibilities. Responsibilities, I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us. Like the responsibility to treat your parents with respect, or the responsibility to manage your own finances? Dad, please, you don't understand, she whined, shifting tactics to the victimhood that had always worked before. Peter and I are struggling right now. The rent is due. The rent that comes out of my account every month. I finished for her. Perhaps it's time you understood what an actual struggle looks like. Fine, she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. You want to play these games? Don't expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. Lily and Noah won't even remember your name by the time I'm done. The threat was familiar, her nuclear option. But yesterday's fear was gone, replaced by a weary clarity. That threat stopped working yesterday morning, Chloe. There was another pause, the sound of her rapid breathing on the other end. I could almost hear her mind racing, searching for a new line of attack now that her primary weapon had been disabled. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she whispered, her voice thick with fake tears. I'm your daughter, and you're punishing me for something I didn't even do. Your choices created this situation, Chloe. Your choices sent that package. You're being ridiculous, she finally snapped, her frustration boiling over. It was one little prank, and you completely lose your mind. There it was, the confession, wrapped in an accusation. A little prank. She had finally admitted it. A prank involving a live animal isn't little, Chloe, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. And a father cutting off financial support after 30 years of enabling isn't losing his mind. It's finally finding it. This isn't over, old man, she spat, the last remnants of the loving daughter now completely gone. You think you can control me with money? We'll see about that. The line went dead. I placed the phone gently on the table. Helen looked at me, her eyes wide. She's coming here, she said quietly. I nodded, probably with Derek. They'll want to continue this in person. We didn't have to wait long. Less than 30 minutes later, the sound of a car engine roaring down our quiet street shattered the morning calm. Tires squealed as Chloe's BMW swerved aggressively into our driveway, followed by the slam of 2-car doors. Heavy, angry footsteps marched up our front walkway. The doorbell rang once, a long, demanding peal. Then again and again, followed by aggressive, pounding knocks. I stood up, feeling remarkably calm. The storm was no longer approaching. It had finally arrived. I opened the door to find them standing on the porch, a 2-person army ready for battle. Chloe's face was red and splotchy from anger, her hair a mess, as if she had driven here in a blind fury. Derek loomed behind her, his arms crossed, his expression a dark thundercloud of malice I had never seen directed at me before. We need to talk, Chloe said, her voice vibrating with rage. She tried to push past me into the house. I didn't move. We already talked this morning. I thought I was quite clear. Clear? She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You were insane. You can't just cut me off because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package. Even now, standing on my doorstep, she couldn't bring herself to admit it. There is no misunderstanding, Chloe. You sent me a snake. I have responded appropriately. Derek stepped forward then, his bulk filling the doorway. Look, old man, maybe you haven't thought this through. Chloe has expenses. The kids need things. Kids whose mother threatens to keep them from their grandparents when she doesn't get her way, I replied, my voice even. Her face contorted. Fine. You want to play hardball? You will never see your grandchildren again. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing their grandfather chose his money over his own family. The words that had once held me hostage, the threat that had been my greatest fear, now felt completely powerless. In the cold clarity of the last 24 hours, I looked at my daughter and saw not the child I had raised, but the manipulative stranger she had chosen to become. Chloe, I said, and my voice was so quiet it seemed to silence the world around us. That's not a threat. That's a blessing. The shock on her face was absolute. Her mouth fell open. This was not the reaction she had rehearsed. This was not the devastating blow that had always brought me to my knees. Peter looked just as stunned. What? Chloe finally stammered. If you are the kind of person who uses your own children as weapons, I explained slowly, then perhaps it is better that they are not exposed to that kind of manipulation. Perhaps it is a blessing that they are kept away from a mother who would teach them that love is a transaction. Derek's shock quickly curdled back into rage. He took another step forward, close enough now that I could feel the anger radiating from him. "We know where you live, old man," he said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "We know your routines. You might want to reconsider your position." I felt Helen tense behind me, but I remained perfectly still, my eyes locked on his. "Are you threatening me, Derek?" "I'm just saying," he sneered, "that family relationships work both ways. You want to cut us off? Fine. But don't expect us to just disappear quietly." "Actually," I said, my voice unwavering, "that is exactly what I expect. And if you choose not to, that becomes a matter for the police, not for family negotiation." Chloe grabbed Derek's arm, a flicker of panic in her eyes. She recognized he was crossing into dangerous territory, but he shook her off. "You think you're so smart," he continued. "You think cutting off our money makes you powerful. There are other ways to get what we need." "I'm sure there are," I agreed. "It's called getting a job. A novel concept, I know, but people have been doing it for centuries." "This isn't over," Chloe hissed, her desperation transforming into pure venom. "You will regret this." "The consequences are already here, Chloe," I said. "You're living them right now." They stared at me for a long moment, the realization finally dawning on them that the bank was closed. Permanently. Without another word, Chloe spun on her heel and stalked back to their car. Derek gave me one last menacing look before following her. I watched them drive away, their tires screeching as they sped down our peaceful street. Only then did I close the front door and turn to Helen. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a look I hadn't seen in years. It was pride. That evening, the quiet in our house was profound. We sat at the kitchen table, the way we had for nearly 40 years, the domestic routine a comfort after the day's chaos. Helen sipped her tea. I nursed a cup of coffee, my mind replaying the confrontation on the porch. "I keep thinking about when she was 8, Helen said softly. "The Mother's Day breakfast she made us. Burnt toast and lumpy orange juice. But she was so proud." "I remember," I said. "I still have the stick figure drawing she made of us that year, tucked away in my desk. The memories felt like they belonged to another family now." "Helen," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "She crossed a line today. Derek threatened us. This can't continue." Her hand trembled slightly in mine. "What are you going to do?" "Something permanent," I said. "Something that ensures this morning's scene never, ever happens again." "You're talking about changing the will," she said. It wasn't a question. "Among other things," I confirmed. "I'm going to call Margaret Summers in the morning." Margaret's law office was a fortress of mahogany and leather-bound books, a place that projected stability and order. She had handled our legal work for 15 years and knew us as a stable, predictable couple. "William," she said, her expression serious as I finished recounting the events of the past week, from the inheritance argument to the snake to Derek's final threat. "This goes far beyond a simple family disagreement. You are describing harassment and intimidation. We need to address this on multiple fronts." Relief washed over me. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's start with your estate. You want to ensure your grandchildren are cared for, without their parents having any access to the funds." "Exactly," I said. "I want their education secured, but I don't want a single dollar going to Chloe's irresponsibility or Derek's gambling." She outlined the plan with brisk efficiency. "We will create an irrevocable educational trust fund. It will be managed by an independent trustee who will disburse funds only for documented educational expenses, tuition, books, tutoring. Chloe and Derek will have no control, no access, and no ability to touch their children's inheritance." Next, she moved on to the restraining order. She systematically documented the threatening language, the snake incident, and the escalating pattern of harassment. Using a live animal to frighten elderly parents is something the courts take very seriously, William. This shows a level of malice that justifies a protective order. "How long will it take?" I asked. "The will modifications can be drafted and signed this week. I can file for the temporary restraining order today. Once it's granted, Any attempt at contact from Chloe or Derek becomes a legal matter, not a family dispute. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Margaret's assistant brought in the necessary documents. As I signed my name, I felt the satisfying finality of it. 30 years of enabling, ending with a few strokes of a pen. The court officers will serve them both by tomorrow morning, Margaret said as I stood to leave. After that, William, you are legally protected. The educational trust was named the Peterson Grandchildren's Fund. Margaret had drafted it beautifully. It would provide for Lily and Noah's schooling, from elementary through university, covering every legitimate need. It was a legacy of love, firewalled from the greed that had nearly torn our family apart. It was the ultimate act of a grandfather protecting his own. Helen and I reviewed the documents together that evening. It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. 2 days later, on a peaceful Thursday afternoon, Margaret called. "William, it's done," she said. "The documents were delivered at 2:15 today. Both Chloe and Derek have been served with the restraining order and have received official notification of the changes to your will and the creation of the trust." I thanked her and hung up. I sat in my armchair, looking out the window at our quiet street. It was over. The constant threat, the manipulation, the endless cycle of crisis, it was all finally over. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet settled over our home. It wasn't the tense, anxious silence of before, but a genuine, profound peace. The phone no longer felt like a threat. The doorbell was once again a welcome sound. Helen and I rediscovered the simple routines we had lost. We took long walks in the evening. We spent hours in the garden. We talked, truly talked, without the shadow of our daughter's problems looming over us. I thought about the little girl who made burnt toast on Mother's Day. I would always love that memory of her, but I had to accept that she was gone, replaced by someone who would send a snake to her own father. My final act of fatherly love was not to write another check, but to build a wall she could not breach, a wall that protected her children from her influence and protected us from her. As the sun set, casting a golden glow through our kitchen window, Helen and I sat in comfortable silence. Our retirement was secure. Our marriage was stronger than ever. And our home, the craftsman house I had poured my life into, was finally a sanctuary again, legally and completely at peace.